Greetings and welcome. I am JustaVOR, bringing you what I hope is constructive information on what the system of white supremacy, racism, is and how it works, as well as what can be done to replace it with a system of justice. Racial classification confusion. What does it mean to be Latino or Hispanic in a system of white supremacy? In our previous video entitled Racial Classification Confusion, White and Non-White in a System of White Supremacy, we explore racial classifications as defined by the government of the so-called United States and its Census Bureau. I strongly encourage you to view that video first if you have not done so already. I have included a link in the description. In the previous video, we studied how the racist strategy of racial classification confusion is used to divide those classified as non-white into different racial classifications and how those groups are defined. This division is used by the white supremacists to further divide non-white people and ultimately continue the maintenance of the system of white supremacy, racism. On this channel, we recognize that words are important and that it would be best to begin with the definition we use for the terms racism and white supremacy, which we have concluded are synonymous and interchangeable, having the same definition, which is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and who are dedicated to the mistreatment and subjugation of all those they have classified as not white. If you watched the previously mentioned video, you would have noticed that we studied the race question page of the U.S. Census Bureau's website, census.gov, and its definition of the race categories, such as white, black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, as well as Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. We also covered the effects of encouraging people to supposedly self-identify as one or more racial groups. Even though these categories or supposed classifications are supposed to be based on self-identification, we were able to logically conclude that
the supremacist always does the classified.
You would also remember that there was no race category for Latino or Hispanic. Why is that? These race categories are used for many reasons related to how the government identifies particular groups of people, especially when it comes to maintaining the system of white supremacy. One must be able to determine in this global system who is white and who is not. And the answer to the so-called race question is often used to determine not only what benefits are given out by the dominant white power group, but also to determine who is to be mistreated and to what degree. Mind you, these race categories and their definitions, as per the Census Bureau, are used on official documents and carry a legal context. So why is Latino and or Hispanic not included with the rest? Oftentimes, in social and official settings, when one asks certain people what their so-called race is, one can be given the terms Hispanic and or Latino as a response. But is Latino or Hispanic a so-called race? What does the Census Bureau have to say about it? Revisiting the website, census.gov, the official government website for the United States Census Bureau, and navigating to the About the Topic of Race page, we scroll down past the aforementioned race categories to the section titled, What is Race? As we learned in the previous video, Racial Classification Confusion, White and Non-White in a System of White Supremacy, the government of the United States concept recognized that race has nothing to do with biology, anthropology, or genetics, but is instead used for social and political purposes. It is at the bottom of this section we read that people who identify their origin as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish may be of any race. Counter-racist logic dictates that there is only one true race in the system of white supremacy, and that is those who classify themselves as white. But what does it mean by people who identify their origin as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish may be of any race? What exactly is a Latino or Hispanic person with respect to race categories? For a little more clarity, and I do mean little, on this confusing topic, we have to navigate to the Topics page, then to Population to find the Hispanic Origin page. For those finding the page difficult to find, I simply typed it in the search bar. I have also included hyperlinks in the description to make navigation easier for VORs. On the Hispanic origin page, there is only a brief paragraph stating that Hispanic origin can be viewed as the heritage, nationality, lineage, or country of birth of the person or the person's parents or ancestors before arriving in the United States. People who identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish may be of any race. So, Latino, Hispanic, and even Spanish, not to be confused with Spaniard, are synonymous and can be used by anyone along with any race category. So one can be a so-called white Hispanic or black Hispanic, Asian Hispanic or an Asian Latino, white Latino, or a Spanish Native American. This conflation between race, ethnicity, and nationality, as well as Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish, appears to only serve one true purpose: to cause confusion about who is on the white team and who is not. The Counter-Racist Code, as developed by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., seeks to counter the confusion caused by white supremacists and their system of racism, white supremacy, by recognizing patterns and using logic. Victims of racism, white supremacy, do not have to fall for much of the confusion racists use to maintain power over their victims. This strategy of racial classification confusion, which makes it difficult to determine who is white and who is not, and thus who is a white supremacist and who is not, is designed to cause great confusion in the minds of non-white people, while those who classify themselves as white have their ways of recognizing who is on the white team, sharing their white power, and who is to be a victim of white supremacy. Using counter-racist logic helps to dispel that confusion. According to the code, to counter the strategy of racial classification confusion, non-white people should use 3 terms as racial classifications: 1, white people; 2, non-white people; and 3, white supremacist racists. When other people use terms other than these 3, one should ask for a detailed explanation that you can easily understand. Mr. Fuller also suggests that we study all of the so-called racial classifications used by others, ask questions about anything said that seems to be contradictory, confusing, and/or non-explanatory, as well as beware of and/or be alert for any so-called explanation that, instead of clarity, focus, and logic, only adds to the confusion. So, using counter-racist logic, recognizing that there are only 3 racial categories: white, non-white, and white supremacists, where does Hispanic or Latino apply? Looking at the Census Bureau and its racial demographics for the United States concept and its population estimates for 2021, we see that Hispanic or Latino accounts for 18.9% of the total U.S. population, which is estimated to be just above 333 million people. Notice that the white alone group counts for 75.8%, and Black or African American alone accounts for 13.6% of the population. Now, we haven't included the other groups, and we can already see that those numbers don't add up, because 75.8 plus 18.9 plus 13.6 equals 108.3%. How can you have a population over 100%? Confused? Well, the confusion begins to clear when we notice a second white category. This is the white alone, not Hispanic or Latino group, which is 59.3%. This reveals that so-called Hispanics or Latinos are included in the first white alone group and count toward the 75.8% of so-called white people. So this means that, as we already suspected, one can be Hispanic or Latino but still be white or non-white. So, How much of the Hispanic or Latino group is included in the white race category? Because we have been led to think that so-called Hispanics or Latinos are some sort of so-called racial minority in the United States concept, that they are a group of non-white people that surpass the black group to become the highest population of so-called racial minorities. Mind you, the code suggests that we only use 3 racial categories: white, non-white, and white supremacist races. If we subtract the 59.3% of white alone, not Hispanic or Latino group from the 75.8% of the white alone group, that leaves us with 16.5% that are Hispanic or Latinos who were added to the white team. Out of the 18.9% of so-called Hispanic or Latinos, 16.5% are classified as white people. Dividing 16.5 by 18.9, we can see that 87.3% of so-called Hispanics or Latinos are classified as white, with the other 12.7% or 2.4% of the total US population being Hispanics or Latinos that are non-white. This means that so-called black people have the highest non-white percentage at 13.6%. And I suspect that number is inaccurately low. While so-called Asians account for approximately 6.1%, so-called American Indians or Native Americans or Alaska Natives accounting for 1.3% of the population. Why does this even matter? Remember on the About the Topic of Race page at census.gov and their alleged explanation for why they track this information? They said that information on race is required for many federal programs and is critical in making policy decisions, particularly for civil rights. States use these data to meet legislative redistricting principles. Race data also are used to promote equal employment opportunities and to assess racial disparities in health and environmental risks. As stated before, I suspect that the real reason for collecting this information is to better determine who is to be in the white power group and who is not, as well as who is mistreated and to what degree. But why should victims of racism really care? Because knowing that the vast majority of so-called Hispanics or Latinos are actually white people who speak Spanish as their first language or come from areas where Latin or Spanish so-called culture dominates the area will make it easier to understand what is going on when you see so-called Latinos or Hispanics embracing neo-Nazi symbolism, Confederate flags, carrying out terrorism against non-white people, and the anti-black racism that can be seen from many so-called Hispanics or Latinos. I think that it must be mentioned that while 87.3% of so-called Hispanics or Latinos are classified as white, many are beginning to reject that classification in favor of having their own race category. Recently, it was reported that the current US President Joe Biden is entertaining that idea. As for the 2.4% of the total US population, those 12.7% of so-called Hispanics or Latinos who are classified as non-white, some are classified as black, or so-called Afro-Hispanic or Afro-Latino, and many are racially ambiguous, where it is very difficult to tell if they are white or non-white. I guess these would be those who would go into the so-called brown stick around classification. Question: what role does the white probation strategy play in white people determining if groups such as Hispanic, Latino, or Arab, for that matter, get to be absorbed into the white team, like what we saw in the past with so-called Italians, the so-called Irish, and so-called Jews? Can there ever be a real alliance between groups of non-white people and groups that include suspected white supremacists? Is it logical for victims of racism to suspect that any white person who can practice racism is practicing racism in this global system of white supremacy? Feel free to leave your questions, comments, and concerns. For more information about the purpose and goals of this channel, as well as some basic definitions of words and terms we use in reference to our work, I have included a link below to a video containing this information. If you would like an even better understanding of the code and how it works, please visit producejustice.com to order the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. There are many constructive suggestions for ending the system of white supremacy, and Mr. Fuller's codebook and its word guide act as guides to getting and keeping on code. If you feel this content is constructive and worth your time and energy, please subscribe and share to support the making of more content in the future. Much appreciation for all the VORs already subscribed. I am JustaVOR, and I'm still learning. Thank you for watching. Until next time.
Let me say something that gets to the very crux of the matter, and this may be offensive for some to hear who are not on the side that we're on. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.
Say that again.
Let me say it one more time for those of you who didn't hear me. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.